My name is Melissa Marshall, and I'm a communications expert that focuses on engineering communication. I'm a TED speaker, and I'm the founder of a training company, Present Your Science.
This week, we got to sit down with Melissa Marshall. She's an expert science communicator and coaches individuals and firms on how they can communicate better with clients, each other, and especially on how to give better presentations. We found out about Melissa after a previous guest had her come into the firm and said it was a huge success. They recommended we ask her to come on the show, and luckily for us, she said yes. If you want the 5-minute scoop on what she does, I'd recommend checking out her TED Talk. We talked with Melissa for over an hour, and I think there's a ton of great tips in here to help communicate better. For some of us, that might mean sales of some kind, but it's also just getting your ideas across to peers and clients. So consider this episode an intro to Melissa's work. If you like what she's doing, I'd recommend getting in touch with her to come talk to your firm or personal coaching. I'll put her info down there in the show notes. So let's get on with the show. I botched the first question a little bit, so I'm just going to ask it again now. Kicking it off with Melissa, we wanted to know a little about how she got started doing what she does and what her goals are in helping scientists and engineers communicate more effectively.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to talk about that. My background is in communications. I think that's always the first thing when I'm talking to two engineers like you, just so that you know, so we're all on the same page right away. I am not an engineer. I am not a scientist, but I always like to say I'm sort of president of the fan club. All right. In that, I believe so strongly that scientists and engineers are the ones that are solving our most important challenges in the world, whether it's energy, environment, healthcare. The work that's happening every day by scientists and engineers is absolutely essential. And that's kind of where I come in, is that as someone who really recognizes that world-changing work, with my background in communication, I early on started to really see a gap that is often happening, which is that you've got the amazing, scientist or engineer or researcher, and when they are trying to convey their solution to someone who is the stakeholder, basically the person that needs to support the idea, sometimes the message just wasn't getting across. And I saw this in a variety of different scenarios. And that was really, for me, the light bulb moment, because as a communications professional, I thought this is a solvable problem, right? There are a couple of techniques that, these amazing professionals could be using that would immediately help the person that was on the other side of the conversation to really get it and to be able to act on and support whatever solution was being discussed. And so that's really the foundation, that sort of the background in terms of why I thought this was, first of all, a problem that mattered. And I thought it was something that maybe I could contribute to. And so what happened along the way is I started to develop and offer training courses to scientists and engineers, teaching some of these tips and tricks and strategies that I really thought would empower them to be able to convey their important ideas more effectively, so that those ideas could go on and actually have the impact they were supposed to have.
Wonderful. I think, us in science and engineering definitely need all the help we can get trying to communicate our ideas. Zach and I obviously have done this podcast for a couple of years now, and I think we still have so far to go on not necessarily, maybe in the podcast as well, but in our working lives, it's hard to communicate a specialty and do it effectively and feel like you're doing it well.
Well, sure. And even from your perspective, both of you being engineers, I'll bet you have, on certainly way more than one occasion, you've probably had conversations with other engineers where you actually didn't understand what they were talking about. Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So imagine then if engineers speaking to other engineers are still struggling with some of the technical content. Now let's add in somebody who's a customer, somebody who is in public policy, somebody who is a business leader, right? Then all of a sudden you can imagine how quickly the problems can compound. But again, I think the big thing is that this is a solvable problem. That's why it's fun to work on.
To that point too, every episode we've recorded with some sort of professional within structural engineering, we've asked them at the end, what makes a good or an excellent structural engineer? And almost all of them have some piece of communication. They have this holistic approach of how to communicate to the owner and to the design team their ideas and thoughts. And every single person is like, technical, sure, whatever. But man, when you can find that engineer that can communicate, they just go up. I'm really excited about this episode because I think all of our listeners are going to get a lot from it.
Yeah, I mean, it is totally the skill set that can really be the X factor in the acceleration of a career. It's certainly first and foremost, you've got to have the great technical skills, but great technical skills only go so far. If you're not able, you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you are not able to effectively and convincingly convey them to the person who actually needs them, then those ideas just stay right where they were to begin with, and that's in your head.
Well, let's talk about what these things are that we can do. So I feel like, and Zach, correct me if you have a different opinion on the type of presentations that we give as engineers. So for us structural engineers, we do the PowerPoint style, but I think a majority of our communication is just phone calls or these large, what we would call OAC meetings, large group meetings where everyone gets a couple minutes to talk about what they're working on the overall project together, focusing first on just the phone call side of things. What do we do that could be improved on?
What I might suggest as a really good just general framework. So if you had to just approach almost any communication situation, whether it's a phone call, a presentation, I think that one of our big challenges that technical professionals deal with is that it's very easy to be what I call a speaker-centered speaker. And that means that when you communicate or talk, you're doing it as though you were also talking to yourself or somebody just like you, right? So you're using, in that phone call, you're using jargon, acronyms, things that you're used to using all the time. And you also talk about things, again, in a way that you would understand. And I think a really big, simple but very significant paradigm shift is to move from the default setting, which again is all of us, right? Our default setting is speaker-centered speakers. And if you move to becoming an audience-centered speaker, the results of that are actually really profound. And what that means is that you ask yourself at every step in the conversation process, what is important or what makes sense for my audience here? And that's a really different way of looking at it. It's very easy to get on and you're on this call, right? And you're trying to give an update about your project. And you're just thinking about all the things you want to get across, right? I want to make sure they know that I, first of all, I did a lot of work. I want to make sure that they know that I, have all of this information. And I think that the better question to be asking yourself to frame that conversation is, of what I've done, what matters to the person that I'm talking to, right? I think that audience-centered communication is a great framework to use because what it then does is it leads to the second thing that matters a lot, and that is filtering your technical detail, right? Because too often, right, somebody asks for an update about something, and then all of a sudden you're just talking and talking and talking, right? And they're feeling, you can see their eyes start to glaze over if you're able to see them, or at the end when you're done and you say, "Are there any questions?" And then they say no. Right. And by the way, typically when there's no questions, that doesn't mean that you are incredibly thorough. That means that usually means that people don't understand what you said. And so I think when you start to filter your content and say, okay, is this important to my audience? That is a great way to filter it. And then the third tip that I would give for those types of conversations is that I think we have to be in our communication, we have to be relentless when it comes to relevance. All right, so tell us the so what, right? Why does this matter? And it's so easy because, as the expert, you have so much background, right? You know that, hey, if I found, this tolerance or this number, like I know when I say that I know why it matters, right? That's incredibly obvious to the expert. But what the really good communicators do is they always go the one extra step to say, this is what we found, or this is what we're suggesting, and here's why it matters, right? So they take that one additional step to do what I call the so what or the relevance statement. I think that's a piece that's often missing. And the reason I think it's missing is that we're self-conscious about, at least a lot of the engineers I work with always say, well, I don't want somebody to think that I think they don't know, right? So it's almost like you're thinking that you don't want to be talking down to somebody. It's this really weird kind of miscommunication of the engineer doesn't want to be talking down to someone by making something obvious. Meanwhile, the person on the other side isn't quite sure if that's really what they meant. And then because everybody's trying to be smart and professional, nobody asks. And we just finish the meeting and move on. And I think that's really the piece that we have to address. And so I think, trying to be really upfront about the so what's or the relevance is critical.
My mind, I have to say, was just absolutely blown, because coming into this recording and talking with you, I've been thinking a lot about, like, okay, I know these really good communicators within the engineering world, or really within the construction world. There's good architects I work with that run these amazing meetings, and contractors as well. And then obviously we have the opposite. I think a lot of what makes them really good and what makes them bad. And for example, the other day I had two meetings on very similar projects with different teams, and one went great, one went horribly. And you literally just stated with those three things exactly why. The so what? One meeting, people were over explaining things that made no sense to majority of the people. That meeting absolutely ended with 0 questions. The next one, everyone was very down to earth. Talking to who they were with at their level. And at the end, it was an explosion of questions, and it went really well. So thank you for putting that together. That makes so much sense.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you know what, Zach? I'm going to clip this part out of the podcast. I'm going to put it right on the front page of my website. So awesome.
Yes, please do. That just went the full circle for me. My mind is blown. That's all I needed today. Thank you.
What you should learn from that is that is just not an isolated experience. The reason that I know that is that I've been working in this space now for 15 years, and it's the same story everywhere. And but here, I always look at that. That's the good news. The reason that's good news is that this is fixable. It's solvable. That's really what we're talking about with some of those tips.
I want to ask about delivering a specific type of bad news to someone. So a lot of things we're talking about are really cost related when we're in construction. Like if we think there needs to be a change in something, it is money. It costs the contractor, the owner, a ton of money. So often it feels like we have to deliver what is kind of bad news, and we have to back that up with some reasoning. Do you have any tips for delivering, what might be a tough pill to swallow, tips to help us communicate the need for these things?
Sure. That's an interesting one. Let me think about a couple of things there. So a few things come to mind. So anytime I am in a challenging communication situation, which, usually for me means that I'm coaching somebody, right, in a challenging communication situation, and you've just identified one. Whenever we're kind of unsure as to, gosh, we've got to talk about this, but, we're not quite sure what to do with it. I learned something really valuable from a mentor of mine early in my career. And the idea is that if you can't fix it, feature it. And that's kind of I have to say, that has really been an interesting way to approach challenging presentation scenarios, because, and to get back to how I think that applies to what you've said, what often happens is that when we have bad news, we delay. We provide background, context. We sort of wait to get to the final slide, right? Which is and here it is, right? And I actually think that leads to part of the problem, because that creates frustration with the audience. Oftentimes, audience members probably already have a little bit of an idea what's coming, and now they feel like you're sort of not being direct with getting there. And so something that I recommend is that if, it's got to be bottom line up front for something like that. You cannot fix the fact, right? I mean, it is what it is. The findings are what they are. Right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's budget or it's time, those are usually the two things that get people worked up. And so you can't change the fact that this is the recommendation. However, I think that people appreciate when you are upfront and efficient about the finding, and then more so you can feature, here's how we can possibly address it. Right? So, let's not spend 10 minutes leading up to it. let's say, here's what it is. And let's spend then the 10 minutes that follow talking about how we can address it together, right? Or how, what are some of the suggestions? I think I don't know that people people in the real world, we know that sometimes there's bad news, right? I mean, we're not thrilled about it. And, certainly if you're a project manager, you wish that wasn't the case, but it is what it is. And so from a communicator's perspective, your job is to get in there, right? Give them the information from your expert perspective. And then furthermore, from your expert perspective, tell them how we might be able to address it, right? So, use that, take that role of being a bit more of a trusted advisor, not just the person who's there to deliver the bad news. And I think that can really change the tone of the conversation. Then I would also just ask presenters who I'm dealing with that are in that scenario, is ask them to remember that being audience centered is always your best option. And so before, you think about the information that you're delivering that maybe is going to not be so well received, you can try to think deeply about, well, why is that going to not be well received? What is my audience going to be concerned about? And immediately start to answer those questions. Because if you're proactive about showing that you understand where the audience is coming from, that is much better and much more well received than what I call the steamroller approach, where you just sort of try to kind of just plow over it and act like maybe, this isn't as significant as it is. Understand, recognize where the audience is coming from, be upfront, and then become someone who is a trusted advisor alongside to try to deal with, pieces of bad news.
Yeah. Right before we started recording, I was writing an email and this has a piece of bad news in it. And I caught myself putting it at the end. And I have a lot of iffy language going into it. This maybe might kind of be a problem. So I think to use those tips, I should maybe move that forward and be direct about what the exact issue is and what the best course of action is to take and, why, and then just let it go.
I do really think that people get frustrated when it's either, kind of murky what the problem is, or if you're alluding to a problem but not really saying, how significant it is. I think it's much more empowering for everybody in the situation to say, this, from my point of expertise, this is what's happening, this is the issue, and here's how we can address it.
One thing we talked about before, and something that you are very, very passionate about is giving presentations, especially as engineers, and maybe you're not the biggest fan necessarily, and we'll find out here about PowerPoint presentations. I gave one the other day that was bullet points with some photos, and I'm assuming that you're not going to say that was the greatest thing I could have done.
Well, I guess I should practice what I preach and give you the bad news up front here, Zach, which is no, that wasn't great. However, not to worry. There's some things that you all and all the listeners can do right away. So first of all, let me talk just a little bit about designing slides. So I actually think that PowerPoint, all right, the tool itself, is an awesome tool. I am not suggesting that people not use PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint is the most user-friendly, most robust tool for creating presentation slides. Here's the problem, and as you're well aware, you can hand plenty of people different tools, and what a random person on the street builds would be quite different from a master carpenter, right, who has training. And so the real problem is that we have a lot of people picking up this tool that are not skilled in terms of what to build with it, and not really by any fault of their own. Again, it goes back to a lot of us haven't received training when it comes to how to do this. And the biggest issue, the biggest reason, what you said there was the bullet points issue. The biggest reason that we are building slides that I think are so challenging for audiences is that we are often just using what is the default template, right? When you open up PowerPoint, it suggests, hey, have a bulleted list. And so the things that are a problem with that, and what I'm really kind of, on this crusade about, is that I think that when it comes to improving your presentation skills, PowerPoint and your rethinking of slide design is like the lowest hanging fruit. If your listeners only do one thing, all right, as a result of this conversation, I would encourage, if you want to immediately improve your next engineering presentation, think differently about what you put on the slide. So the things that I'd like people to think about instead. Normally what we do on slides, right, is quite a bit of text, usually in the form of bullet points. The problem with that is that if you thought about your listeners, and this, by the way, does not matter if you're in person or in a virtual setting, if you just think about a live person, right, on the other side that is listening to your message, when you have a lot of text on the screen and then also you are talking, what that leads to is what's called cognitive overload, right? The human brain only has a certain capacity to process verbal information. And so essentially what we're doing in all of our presentations is we're creating a traffic jam on the verbal part of the brain, right? We are putting so much stuff on one channel of the brain, and as a result, none of it's getting through as effectively as it could. That's why, and I'm sure that you've all experienced this and your listeners could think about it too, that when we are sitting in a presentation, I want you to think about this the next time you're in a text-heavy bulleted talk, which will happen probably in the next 24 hours. The next time that you're in a presentation like that, when those slides come up, what do you do? And probably, if you're like most people, you do one of three things, right? You either, number one, you will read the slide and you ignore the presenter. I see some, you know,
Yes,
you got,
yes.
yeah. So Max is nodding his head. So that's what Max does. You know, Max, I actually do the exact opposite. When I see a text-heavy slide come up, I will never read it. I ignore it completely and I just listen to the presenter. And look, see, and that's what Zach is doing. By the way, I wish the listeners could see you all. But yes, so yeah. You guys, so between the three of us, right? Someone's in group one, someone's in group two, and now I can surely, guarantee that some of the listeners are in group three. And group three is what I call the tennis group. So tennis group is back and forth. Like they skim the slide, they look for like the bold or interesting information, then they listen a little bit, then they skim the slide. Here's the thing: everybody does one of those three things. It does not matter which you do because they are all evidence of the problem. And that is that notice that nobody said, and nobody ever says, that I'm simultaneously streaming in both the words of the speaker and the words of the slide. We aren't, because our brain isn't wired to do it. And that is why text-heavy bulleted slides are such a problem, because we are creating this enormous cognitive load on the brain. And the reason I think this has such big implications for communication of science and technical information is that already, just because of the nature of the work, scientific or technical information is intellectually challenging, right? I mean, this is stuff that you've got to dig in and really think about. And what's happening is that we are burning a ton of intellectual fuel just on people trying to deal with the traffic that's coming in to the brain. We're not spending any of that brain power thinking about the actual ideas. And that is a huge problem in my mind. So essentially, what's happened is that we are designing our slides in a way that runs against the way the human brain processes information. And that's really how I start to have these conversations. It's why I think it matters so much, is that to me, again, I am relentlessly practical. I cannot think of any reason why we would want to be actively designing our slides in a way that research would suggest runs totally against how my audience would process them. That makes no sense at all, and yet it is what 98% of the world is doing day after day with their slides. Now, the reason people are doing that, first of all, they're doing it because that's what they've always seen and they've never had any training, and that's what everybody else does. So there's a status quo issue. But also, I think we are often designing slides for ourselves. So it comes back full circle to what I mentioned previously about our default setting being speaker-centered speakers, right? Yeah. We design slides to be our speaker notes, to remind us what to say. And I think that if we stop and ask ourselves, hey, what's the audience-centered way to design our slides? Then all of a sudden, we end up with a very different set of ideas and recommendations. Because if you and your listeners think about, well, what do you appreciate when you're in presentations? I'll bet you love it, right? When people show, interesting images, when they show, when they show charts, diagrams, graphs of data, maybe they show blueprints, when they're showing things that you can actually look at, and then as the expert, they describe them to you. Right now, all of a sudden, you're like, okay, this is pretty cool because I'm looking at something on the screen and I'm listening to an expert explain it to me. To me, that's where we need to be going with our slides. So, bottom line, what I would recommend and what I advocate and teach to all of the groups that I have the opportunity to train is the idea of each slide having one central message. That's it. All right. Think of each slide as having a takeaway message. And I put that at the top. Right? Just what do I want my audience to know or understand as a result of this slide? And actually write it out as a complete message instead of just the topic being, results or structure or, actually say something, the data shows that. Right. So say something about it and then support that with a visual image. Right. The data shows that there was an increase and then show us a graph with that and then describe and talk about it. Ultimately, I think that we've got to move beyond bulleted lists because they are not helpful to our audience and they do not align with how people learn. But the great news is that if you are willing to go against that trend and be much more visual with your approach, then this is a place that you can immediately excel beyond what other people are doing. And that's I think it's the number one reason that the people that I've worked with have been able to go on and be so successful with their presentation skills is that, again, this is, if you just change this piece, it has such an unbelievable impact on how successful your presentation is. People respond to it immediately. And the only reason typically I find that people struggle with this is that people will just say, well, this just isn't how we usually do it. And, I think that essentially 20 some years that we've had PowerPoint since 1987. So, 24 years of engineering presentations have happened in a flawed manner simply because everybody's just looking at everyone else and saying, well, I guess this is how we do it.
Yeah.
And so for me, that is basically my life's work, which is to disrupt that system, right? Because I think that we have a lot of really good ideas that aren't moving forward because, in part, we are presenting them and in a way that is not allowing audiences to connect. And I think one easy place to start, if you are willing to challenge the status quo, is to think differently about your slides. Move away from the bullets and be much more visual.
I think as you're describing the bullet points, I'm thinking of, that's certainly exactly what I do. And I think it's also a lazy move because you make yourself an outline and then you just put that outline on slides and you think that you've done a great job because you're going to, extrapolate on all these points you've made. But it's basically just putting your work that you did ahead of time just right in front of you so you can read it. Yeah. And then thinking that is what other people want to look at as well. It's just, to me, it's just cues for myself, but there's no reason that other people need to be looking at my cues.
So here's the thing. What happens, this is so, I'm always focusing on the audience because for me, my goal is to make my scientists and engineers more successful. And I think the way to do that is let's optimize for our audience, right? And, for your user, and then we're in a better spot. However, it's interesting. And since you brought it up, I'll say a little bit about it, that bullets also are a real problem for speakers. So I would say that one of the biggest issues that audiences report to me when they say when I'm like, oh, what didn't go well about that presentation is they'll say, well, it lacked clarity and it had too many details. And what happens is that when we prepare on our slides, so I want to, kind of introduce this idea of topics versus takeaways. So Max, you were saying you sit down, right, at your computer and you're like, okay, this slide, I'm going to talk about this topic. Right. And it doesn't matter. Whatever you put at the top of that slide is a phrase or a topic. And then you start to think about all the points, which is what you just said. Well, okay, I'm going to talk about this topic. And, here's the different points that I want to expound upon. And so you put all of those on there. And then you're looking at that slide and you're giving yourself a pat on the back. You're like, all right, you know what? This looks professional. I've got some things that I'll need to remember what to say. I am good to go. Now, that is, to my mind, the most dangerous position to be in. If you ever have that feeling, it should be all the red lights are going off, because here's what happens. Fast forward. By the way, I'm just, having fun with you, but this is everybody all the time.
So far, you're right on. So
fast forward to the presentation itself. And now what happens is you are in front of the audience and that slide comes up and you've got a phrase topic at the top and you've got all of these points that are on the slide. And as a speaker, what you now have to do is you have to figure out, what have I already said? What's coming up next? And now I have to make sense of all of these disparate points, because that's a bulleted list is by nature unrelated. No relationships come through. It's just disparate points. And then you have to figure out how to make all those connections. And ultimately what you're wrestling with is, what am I actually trying to say? And so that is why I believe that step in the preparation process of preparing via topics and bullets leads to the presentations that lack clarity and coherence. And here's the thing that you could do instead. If you did not, this was what would change your preparation phase to be much better to set you up for success later on, is that instead of doing a topic at the top, do a takeaway. Ask yourself, what can you give me a random topic from the top of a slide that you might have?
Oh man. Well, the thing that I'm grappling with right now is a way too tall retaining wall. So let's see.
Yeah. So, okay. So you have a retain, so does it say like retaining wall issues, or what does it say at the top for one of those?
Yeah, a retaining wall issues, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Okay, great. So here's the thing. Can you see that works great? So let's think about that topic, retaining wall issues. Think of how many things fit under that topic. A lot, right? That is not a very good filter, and it's not very focused. And so that's part of the problem, is that what's happening when we prepare in these topic bullet slides, it's not forcing you to really get clear on what you're trying to convey to your stakeholder about retaining wall issues. What I'd be asking you is, what about it? Retaining wall issues will require 6 months to mitigate. Right? Retaining wall issues require additional funding. Retaining wall issues are focused in 3 areas, right? Say something about it, because the second that you create a takeaway, and I would define a takeaway as a full sentence, right? That's the only thing that you got to do. There is a big difference in terms of thinking when you think in terms of topics versus thinking in terms of takeaways. If you just start to think in terms of takeaways, immediately, here's what's going to happen. You're going to, first of all, find this to be harder than you think. And all the listeners, just to level set on everyone, all I've said right now is just write a full sentence at the top of your slide, right? That is not a rocket science idea. Everybody out there has perfectly, plenty of intellectual power to understand that. So you're thinking like, oh, sure, whatever. Here's what you're going to find. When you do it, it'll actually be really difficult, but that's a good thing. Because what will happen is you're going to have to sit in front of that slide, Max, and you're going to have to sit there and say, well, shoot, what about retaining wall issues? Well, I kind of wanted to say this. I kind of wanted to say this. Like, you start to think of all the things you want to say. And because of that constraint, you've got to come up with one, right? Yeah. What is the point? Every slide should have a key point. And that should be written at the top in a full sentence. And when you add that constraint, what it does is it creates an immediate level of deeper thinking and more focused thinking that has a huge positive outcome when you get to the presentation, because it is really a good idea, I think, to wrestle with what you're actually trying to convey when you're thinking about the work. I think it is not a good idea to wrestle with what you're trying to convey when you're in front of your stakeholder. And that's what's happening, right, all of the time. So bullets give us the illusion of content. Takeaways force us to actually decide what we're trying to say. And when we get clear on that as a technical professional in the preparation phase, we have an enormous advantage when we get in front of our stakeholder, because we already know our messages. Now we are now going to be able to talk about those instead of trying to figure them out on the spot.
Okay, tell me about like slide length. Can you have 100 slides as long as they're all formatted the way they should be, or should you still be concise with just the number of slides?
So I think a great rule of thumb, this doesn't apply to everything all the time, but also I learned that I know engineers really like parameters and constraints. Yes. And so I think a great rule of thumb is no more than 1 slide per minute of talk time. I rarely see that rule violated successfully. And so I think that if you've got a 15-minute talk, I would want to have at maximum, and that's including all the different kinds of slides, at maximum 15 slides. And here's an important caveat: the more technical the talk is, that number should go down. So that is the maximum, right? If it is easy breezy stuff where everybody's on board and it's like really simple things, then you can be clipping along at that 1 slide per minute of talk time. As soon as it becomes deep technical, challenging, difficult, and you've got a 15-minute talk, I'm going to be wanting to be way more in sort of that 10 slide range. But I think that it's a great way to check yourself right away, is to say, hey, because I mean, how many, if you thought about conferences and things, right? So typical conference talk is 15 or 20 minutes. How many 15 or 20 minute talks have you seen try to go through 42 slides all the time?
All of them.
Right, all of them. And that is absolutely, it is a fool's errand. You can't be successful with it. And it's a really great way to check yourself. Just always align your slide count with your time, and less typically than the maximum 1 minute per slide.
Going through this talk, kind of your ideas with PowerPoints and slides. Something that kind of hit me is why I put so much information on the slide. I'm sitting here going, okay, yeah, I really don't need it. I think what I've been taught is that I need all the information there so I can PDF the slides and I can send them out as meeting minutes. And hey, I don't need to do any follow-up. So I think it almost comes from laziness, is why I put so much information on the slide.
Well, you know what, Zach, I'll be kinder than that. I think you're being too hard on yourself. It's not laziness. It's actually business necessity. Because it is really important that people have, let's just say somebody couldn't attend the meeting, right? I mean, then they're going to be like, hey, Zach, send me along the slides, right? Because I couldn't be there, but, I want to make sure I'm up to date. And so what's happening is that we are often, and you're exactly right, we are often designing slides to also serve as the handout or the documentation, right? And so they're trying to, they essentially, we're creating them to stand alone. Hey, somebody couldn't attend the meeting. I'm just going to PDF them over the slides and, they're good to go. So I want you to think about that for a moment. So now what you've actually done is you have designed your slides to make you redundant. I mean, think of that. Now you are standing in front of a room, or you're on a call, and you are now trying to talk through slides that are already doing exactly what you had planned to talk about, and you aren't really adding a lot of value as a presenter. So, and the other way to look at it is that we are now using, I would say, when we try to make slides become the handout, we are using one tool to do two things badly. Because think about that, right? I mean, you now have a slide that was designed to stand completely alone, which makes it not a very good presentation aid for you as a speaker, because it's not alone, it's there with you. So it's not doing that well. But now I want you to also think about the use case of someone who's sitting at their computer. They couldn't attend the meeting, or they want to reference the material. And now what are they looking at? They're looking at a bunch of fragmented ideas in the form of topics and bulleted lists on slides. And they're trying to look at a written document and make sense of it. And that's not really the medium that written work was intended to be in, right? Written work is intended to be in full sentences and, written paragraphs and that sort of thing. So here's the great news. I love this. I'm so glad you brought this up, because I can solve this for you and for your listeners as well. So here's what we should be doing. We should be using the notes pages of PowerPoint way more. So you could take a look at whatever deck you're working on right now that made you think of this. Take a look at all of the text. If you did nothing else, you can just look at all the text on that slide, select all of it, hit cut, and paste it right to the notes pages, right? Because I'm not really saying that information is bad. I'm saying it's in the wrong place. Right? Because we're usually using those slides to stand alone. And so I think we should be using the notes pages much more effectively. And so then now what that does is it frees up our slide, and we can say, okay, what makes sense for the actual presentation? So I've put all of the details, and think of the notes pages as well, all the things that you plan to say while the slide is showing. Right? Here's the things I'm going to point out on the graph. Here's the things I'm going to talk about. The notes pages is a really robust area. You can put lots of stuff down there, and you can write out full ideas, links, the whole bit. And so then you look at your slide and you say, all right, how can I design this slide to make sense in a live presentation? And then here's the final piece. All right. So now we've done those two things. We've now got the slide, we've got the notes pages, and here's the part. When you do the PDF, save it as a PDF of notes pages. So that's the piece that has to change. Do not send people the PowerPoint itself, because I know they could dig and look at the notes pages, but 0% of people will do that. And when you open it up, what you want them to open up is that notes pages document, because what that will look like is it'll be, full page. On the top 50% of the page will be the slide that you presented. And I'd like to remind you, what are they going to see from that slide that you presented? They're going to see a clear takeaway message at the top, right? Here's my point. they're going to see an important or interesting piece of visual evidence that supports the point. And that's the top 50%, and that's what you delivered. And then as they keep reading down, now they're going to see all of the accompanying details. So what that enables you to do is in one file type, that enables you to have both a successful presentation aid and a successful handout without conflating the two. So that's what you should do next.
Huh, I like that. And the last meeting I had, it was an internal meeting, and they actually had me record it. Again, we're on a call like this, and we recorded it and sent it out to everybody. And I was trying to figure out how many people are going to look at the slides versus watch the video versus reach out to me to follow up. And I really like that idea. That's great.
How do you recommend people prepare for a presentation so that they're not just leading themselves into the same exact thing they've been doing, the same bullet point approach? Do you have recommendations for collecting your thoughts in a way that you can convey well in a presentation?
Something that I like to think about as sort of an exercise for preparation is that I think of a technical presentation as a hike up a mountain, right? I mean, I think it's not a leisurely walk through a meadow, right? It's a challenging thing, but there's nothing wrong with a challenge because, why do we like hiking mountains? Because there's a beautiful view at the top, right? And to me, it's the same thing actually in a technical talk. Every talk, right, tries to achieve something, right? There's a view that you as the presenter want for your audience. And so I think a really great preparation strategy is to sit down first and ask yourself, what's the view, right? What do I want at the end of this talk? If people know nothing else, what is the thing that they need to know? I call that the view at the top of the mountain. I think every talk should have one because here's the thing. It's amazing to me the number of people that give talks. And if you ask them at the end, like, all right, like what's the most important thing I need to know? They can tell you like 6 things, but people really struggle to tell you the thing. Mm-hmm. And again, this all goes back to one of the big complaints that audiences have, which is that they're overwhelmed by detail in technical presentations. So I think we have to get much more clear on this is the view. This is what I'm trying to achieve. Once you have that, then you could ask yourself, well, all right, what would my audience need to know in order to get there? Because I think that when we prepare with the end in mind, what that does is allows a much better kind of filtering and prioritization of your ideas, because by nature a presentation is constrained, right? You never really have enough time to talk about everything, and so you have to pick and choose. And I think that when you pick and choose with the top of the mountain or the end in mind, that allows you to look at the content that you're selecting for the presentation. And I look at each piece and say, is this relevant to the top of the mountain or not? Right? Is this important or not? And I think that's a really good way to think about it. So thinking about this mountain, top of the mountain idea. So I'll go through just a quick example. So let's just say I'm giving a presentation, all right? And the view, you guys are my audience, all right? The view that I want you to have at the end is that new methods are needed to detect plastic explosives in airline baggage. All right, that's the message of my talk. New methods are needed to detect plastic explosives in airline baggage. All right, that's what I want you to walk away from my talk with. That's the view. That's the most important thing. So I'll ask you all, live, what would I need to cover in order for you to get there, right? So just think of, this is just a logic question, right? So in order, because I can't just arrive and say, hi, Zach, hi, Max, new methods are needed to detect plastic explosives in airline baggage. Please forward all of your funding to my team, right? That's not really how it works, right? You've got to sort of build the case. So I'll just ask you guys, what are some things that I would need to cover for you to get there?
I think you'd need the why, right? Are plastic explosives getting through?
Very good. So we need to understand the threat. Exactly, right? So nobody's interested in funding new methods if this is an actual threat, right? So we need to talk about the magnitude of the threat. So that's statistics, examples, case studies. Exactly. That's a critical detail. What's another critical detail?
Why does it matter to me?
Good. All right. So why is it something that you care about? Excellent. What else?
Is there a path to find these new methods?
Yeah, very good. So in order to think about the new methods, we have to understand the context, right? So what methods exist already, right? What's wrong with them? Very good. So here's what we just did. In that very quick conversation, we've just identified 2, maybe 3 key details, right? Which, to me, if we're thinking about the path up the mountain, I would say what Zach suggested at the start is, why does it matter to the audience, right? What's their stake in it? And then I think so that would be the kind of the intro or the beginning, maybe. Then I think the next step is what you mentioned, Max, which is, well, is this really what's the magnitude, right, of this issue? So, that's how big of a problem is this? And then I think the final one is, what's the context in terms of existing methods that's out there, and what's our path to try to develop or, improve upon those. And once you've done those things, now, at the end of the talk, I can earn the top of the mountain, which is to say, all right, so based on all of this, I hope that you can agree that new methods are needed. That's a quick conversation that shows, though, the exact same thought process that I think everybody should do when outlining their talk. Work backwards from the top of the mountain, because then what that means, and this has really important implications if you're trying to persuade, which often you are, right? Mm-hmm. And when you are trying to persuade, what you're doing is you are giving people at the end, they can understand where they've arrived. All right, hey, I understand the view. And if they can retrace their path, they are much more likely to be convinced. A confused audience is always a no audience. So, to get back to what you had originally, asked, several minutes ago, we're doing that thinking process. Imagine how different that is from what people usually do right now. Because guess what everybody does right now? I've got a presentation coming up. We sit down at our computer and we open up a blank presentation of slides. And then we just start filling in whatever comes to mind. And so this all comes full circle. It's we have to change. These are actually relatively simple steps that we can take, but what they are is different. And I think that's really important to recognize, is that I do believe that if you want to really improve your engineering communication skills, you've got to change your habits. We're not going to get a new result by doing the same thing over and over again. That's something that can be hard, because people will say, well, I can't change my slides. Nobody does slides like this, or I've always done slides like this. That's fine. Hey, if you are just rocking it with the bulleted lists and you just feel like people are hanging on your every word, then by all means, you carry on. But I think for a lot of people, they realize it's not working. Yeah. But they're just not sure what to do about it. And these are all things that I think are very accessible if you're just willing to try. If I had to really boil this down to 3 action items that people could take from this discussion, the first is be audience centered with your focus. So be aware that your default is to be speaker centered, and ask yourself, can I make choices instead for my audience? I think that's the first really actionable thing. I think the second really actionable thing is what we discussed in that mountain idea, which is, what am I trying to achieve? I think you should be able to articulate at the very early start of every presentation, here's what I want people to take away. And you should work backwards from there to determine what makes it into the presentation. It should not be a surprise to you or anybody else at the end, what is the main point of the presentation. And once you've done that, then step 3 is, let's think about the slides. All right, because once I have those steps along the path up the mountain, now I know what types of slides I need to create, right? What would I need to talk about, or what would I need to show in order to convey that, this is a serious threat? Or what would I need to convey in terms of talking about the design process, right? Now we can start to create slides that are more visual in nature. And I think if we do those things, we're already making a pretty solid step forward.
That's fantastic. So before we let you go, I want to hear a little bit more about your company. The way that we got in touch with you, basically, is we had Simpson on the show last year, and Annie was saying that you came to Simpson and it was fantastic. We get, like Zach had mentioned earlier, we got in the conversation, what makes a good engineer? She said, communication is just so important. I said, but we talked with Melissa Marshall and it was amazing, and it helped our team communicate better. And she went on and on. So for people that want to learn more, to get in touch with you, can you tell us just a little bit more about the training that you do and how people can reach you?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I'm easy to find. My website is presentyourscience.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. But I think the easiest way to get in touch with me is just to go to my website, presentyourscience.com. That would be the best way to get in touch with me. And what you'll see when you look at some of the things that I've got out there is that what I do and what I'd love to be able to do perhaps for some of your listeners and the groups that they are a part of is that I offer virtual workshops and trainings, strategies that engineers can use immediately to improve the way that they're talking and presenting their work. So usually a group will work with me. I'll do a 60 or 90 minute hands-on workshop on several different topics. Some of my topics: how to tell a clear technical story, how to transform your slide design, how to be dynamic in the virtual environment. Those are just a couple of the things that I talk about with a lot of engineering companies. And then I also do quite a bit of one-on-one coaching. People can actually submit to me a video. They can just record themselves in Zoom, for example, and they can submit a short video presentation to me, and I'll provide them. I've got a cool software platform that I can actually provide time-stamped feedback throughout the presentation. So if you've got an upcoming important presentation, you can actually send that to me, and I'll review it and give you my detailed, at each section of the presentation, some feedback. So those are a couple of the things that I do. Certainly in the pandemic world, I used to do keynotes and things at conferences back in the day. Remember when we all used to do things like that? But yeah. And I have been doing some virtual keynotes for organizations. That's actually how I gave a keynote at an ASCE conference.
Oh yeah.
And so that's how she found me there, and then I went and talked to her to her technical colleagues at Simpson. But so those are a couple of things that I do, and I sure would love the opportunity to work with the companies and groups of some of your listeners.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put all your contact information and website links and link to your TED Talk in our show notes. So check them out below if you're interested. I think that wraps it up. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.